Hello Ladies Night contributors. My name is Greg Sorkin. I will be showing you how to letter a page using my method. Be doing a sample page this here, P.I. Jane page, which I co-created and co-write with Ladies Night editor Lauren Burke, and the artist is Tony Maldonado. So you'll see me start to finish do this page here. But before I get into that, let me show you some handy tools and stuff out there that you can use. First up is blambot.com. Nate Picos is a pro letterer who does a lot of indie books for Image and Dark Horse and places like that. And he does tons of them and super quick. And I don't really know how he has the time because he also creates two free fonts, or two fonts per month, one free, one paid. And you have dozens and dozens to choose from. And if you'd like to buy any of them, which are reasonably priced, anywhere from $20 to $40 or so, you have a 10% off code right here. And once a year around Black Friday, he also does a 30% off site-wide sale. Very nice, handy to follow. He's super nice and will answer questions, which I ask from time to time on the Facebook sites. Why did I sound like an old man there? And Twitter. But also, he has important, handy things like this information about comic book grammar. So things that you wanted to learn how to do, you now have a way to find out what they're called so you can look them up. You know, breath marks and bursts and butting borders up against panel walls and all sorts of handy stuff with examples. Very good utility here. Also, he's got anatomy of a script here, so if you're ever curious about things like that, it's a good way to format. It's a pro example. This is Brain Boy from Image Comics, it looks like. And there's also stuff on logo design, hand lettering, art dimensions, which you might find helpful as well. You see there with descriptions and all sorts of good stuff. Very handy resource, very good to follow. Knows his stuff inside and out. Another option is comicbookfonts.com, which is the Comic Craft guys of Richard Starkings and John Rochelle. And you've seen them do all sorts of DC books and some Image books, or Dark Horse, like Buffy and Angel, and I guess all the Whedon books, and among others. Their fonts are a little pricier. You see that they start at $70, or here's a $30 one, $30. They average somewhere around $100 or $120, I feel like. Anyways, twice a year they have a sale. In the summer, there's usually one that's about half off site-wide, and in a New Year's Day, the price of the year is that year's number. So we're coming up on $20.16 for everything, including this $129 one right here, or they have a couple that are sub $20 that get raised to that level. So it all levels off. Very handy. They also have a book called Lettering the Comic Craft Way that you can get on Amazon, and is a good overview on how to do things that I'm going to show you. Although I do mine a little differently, which I will point out why as I go. So let's hide the internet there. I've pulled off a script from Google Docs, which, side tip, you can set up a table of contents so that when you don't want to have to scroll through 8 pages to get there, at least 8 pages, you can jump right to it. See, I would have scrolled through 15 pages to get there, and it's so much quicker and easier. Just install bookmarks and create links at the top. Very handy, especially when you're lettering a week at a time and you do it and you have to open this all the time. I've also got a couple of files here. I got this Jane page 8, which is blank, and I'll import my art and script and show you things like that. And then a prepped one so that we can save some time. Naming convention, very important. You don't want to be hunting for files, so I usually tend to name my art the name of the project. In this case, we'll abbreviate it to Jane. Issue 03, page 08. And then I'll even put in a version number now, so if I have to go back and make edits, I can retain my old one. File management is super handy to do and worth taking some extra time to put together, because it will save you time when you're hunting for files later, when everything's clearly labeled. So let's jump into Adobe Illustrator. I am on let's open the file first. I am using a Mac, so if you're on Windows, there'll be some slight differences, but overall, it will mostly be the same. I think Option is in place of Alt, so Option on Mac, Alt on Windows, and I'll be using Command a lot. I will also be using a lot of keyboard shortcuts that I've managed to memorize, surprisingly, and or created. So this is my template here. This is what I usually use for clients because it has information like issue and page numbers. It has version history. It has a date of completion. It has these handy dandy measurements written out so that they know what they're getting, and it has my logo. This is a standard comic book size page. You can see that full bleed is this outer box here. This goes to the edge of the page. So if there's art that spills over that you want to get trimmed down to the actual trim size, which is the next measurement here, I just pointed to my screen like an idiot, not using the mouse. This is where your issue will get trimmed down to typically for print after it's printed for assembly. And then the next thing is the live area, which is the innermost box. This is where all the text should fall in. You see the measurement here is a little bit less than the others. I also put one in between because when I do stuff for the web, I don't worry about bleed, and when I have to print it, I scale it down. So now I have a little stop in the middle that acts as the new trim line essentially. But you don't necessarily need to use that. I don't understand why the live area is still a thing, or why it's still so small in the era of digital printing. I understand it with old clunky printers from the past, but things have gotten a lot quicker and easier, and I don't really understand why this is still so small. I've also never bothered to ask, so there's that. Full disclosure. So, the art that you will be importing is very easy to do. I will go to my Dropbox, and see organization. I even have completed projects, so they're not in my way. So I will go back out to the Jane folder with all the art, issue 3, and this is page 8. So I will drag this in, and I've set up over here. I've set up a layer, so I have my workspace on the very bottom, and the page info, which is all this stuff, is on the next lowest layer, just mostly to keep it out of the way. The artwork comes after that, and I've actually put this on the wrong layer, so I will click this box here with it selected and drag it down, and then I will line it up to my guides, which are set up here. And again, this is the outer one is full bleed. I'm not going to worry too much about following the live area in here for this purpose, because these go on the web first, and again, there's no such thing as trim on the web, so we just, or live areas really, so we just let it go. Once the art is in place, you'll lock it, and then I have two things for text here. I also have a bunch of elements that I'll reuse during this tutorial. So rather than having to create them new every time, the common ones I just keep handy. And also as I go, a way to keep track of caption colors or other color you use to identify characters when they're not directly speaking with the tail and everything. Keep that here, and I even label them. We'll be using Jane's today, and then I will scoot. So my artboard is this entire white area here. So when I export, it would export all of this stuff here, including all the notes, the trim lines, the measurements, etc. Way off to the side, what I will do is I will go to my live text layer, and I will start copying this in. This is the most tedious part of the thing, I guess. So I'll go and click on my text tool here, drag a box out of random size, paste, and repeat. One of the things I'll use the most is Option click. Option click to copy, and then I'll drag it down. This makes it a lot easier, and then I paste over it. And we'll do one more. So the next thing I will do is highlight everything and center it, so that it's all, because this is going to be dialogue, so it's all going to need to be centered. And then I will choose my font, which Normally I letter Jane in Blambot's Silver Age uppercase, but for poops and giggles I'm going to redo it in Eurocomic, which is another one of his, which you might have seen in books like Black Science. Um, I like my fonts to start at size 11. And, oh, another tool I forgot to mention. I do a lot of projects, so I have a Google spreadsheet with all the information I need. So here's my project titles, the fonts I use regularly, not stuff for like sound effects generally. The size, which is 90% 11 here. The leading, or possibly leading, depending on who you ask, is the height between lines. So let's zoom in. So as I adjust this, you see that the lines get closer together. I don't like super wide because I think it's too big and looks kind of childish. So I try to find one that's just wide enough. And the rule of thumb is if you highlight a couple of lines and were to make them bold, and you see that they don't touch, you're good to go. You don't want them to touch like that. So we'll undo that with Command Z, which is another one of your best friends in Illustrator or Adobe of any kind. Then I'll get to scaling a little later on, but once I've shaped my text, I then scale it down evenly so that everything is the same. I used to eyeball this, which was a giant pain, and then at some point it occurred to me that I could just do this, and it saved me so much time. I also have any kind of notes I would need for that particular project, and then I've even started keeping track of number of pages lettered and my rate. So very handy. It's Google is great because it's accessible from anywhere. I can get it on my phone. I can get it on my laptop. I can get it at home. I leave it open all the time because I use it all the time. And we're even going to follow some of these today. So I've used Eurocomic on another project called Grayfell down here. So I'm going to go with these settings, which I have size 11 to start, leading leading of 12. That's the space in between the lines, and I'm going to scale it down to 60 when it's time to do so. So I would normally continue this on, and then I would also, let's back it out and scoot over, and then I'd also follow the script and see if there's any kind of emphasis added. So we'll just pick a line here and then throw it in italics. So now there's a little bit being read into how it's being said. In this case, have you finally gone insane? That sort of thing. For bold, it always looks so huge to me, and I just really want it to be darker, not necessarily larger. So what I like to do is I knock most bolds down 1 point, and I would keep going, copying the script in some kind of order. I usually do a column, and then when I get down low enough, I'll just start a new column up at the top here. But this is really tedious, and I don't really want to make you guys watch that, so I'm going to save the page with the art added and all that and resized and close it because I've already done this. So I've already copied in the entire script, which you can see is a lot, and I've already put in my emphasis where it's needed so that I don't have to bother doing it again. A note about crossbar I, when it is a personal pronoun like I think here, or I'm in, or I literally, you will use the crossbar I. That means the top and bottom have the little half lines there. For everything else, literally everything else, you will, if at all possible, you will use a straight line I, whether it's like in here or whether it's let's see, since, as long as it's not referring to a person themselves, avoid the crossbar. Use, even if it's like an initial like FBI or CIA. I don't like using it for that either, but depending on who you ask, it's acceptable. So I've got everything copied in, and I even have a couple of sound effects. So I'm going to highlight all of this. I don't want to ruin this in case I have to go back and make edits. It's so much easier to just copy a new element that you need out. So I'm going to option click it all over and drag it over, and I want it on my topmost layer because that's my working layer. So I'll put that in there, and I'll even lock the live text. When I do lettering, I like to break up text a lot so that it's not so overloaded. So I might have a paragraph here or a paragraph here that I'll split into 2 or 3 balloons. I like little bite-sized, small pieces of text. So I'm going to start doing that now. So even though I'm relettering this, so I just option clicked again, I cut out the part I wanted, I pasted in a new part. Even though I'm relettering this, I'm probably going to use the same placement, more or less. Even although this font might be a little smaller, so I might have a bit more room to play with. Either way, you kind of want to shape your text as close to an oval as you can. So you want, let's see, break off another piece, highlight and paste over it. So I'll show you here. So you want to just put in your line breaks so that it kind of resembles an oval. Sometimes you're going to have thin ovals, and sometimes you're going to have larger ones. I'm probably going to butt this against the top, so I'm going to leave some room for the text. So, but generally oval shaped. Odd numbered lines are always easier because you have a little middle section that you can make a little larger if you have, or wider if you have to. So I will either typically letter a page in order, or just I'll go back and forth. I'll sometimes do the easiest panels first, or the ones with the least thinking and placement involved, and jump around. But we'll start at the top here today. Another thing I learned to do along the way, because lettering is so tedious at times, I began using actions. For all the stuff that takes more than a couple of steps, I've created an action, and some of them even have keyboard shortcuts. So, for example, align center, I'll show you in a second how I use that. It just center aligns and vertically center aligns, horizontally center aligns and vertically center aligns, all in one step. I've got a couple of compound shapes here because I don't use the Pathfinder thing, the Unite Pathfinder tool, so I can go back and make edits, which I'll explain more when I get to it. Where I combine the shape, I set the strokes, and then I send it to the back of the layer because I don't need it on top anymore. I have that for various stroke sizes, and another one I'll use constantly is this clipping mask, which basically does exactly what it says. It takes two selections, it makes a clipping mask, and it sends it to the back for me. Offset paths are good for connectors between balloons, which I'll probably end up using in this first panel. And if I ever wanted to shear some stuff pretty quickly, I have a few different percentages set here. So, I have 3 balloons here, which I will highlight, and then I will create outlines by going to Type, Create Outlines. This means that you can't edit it anymore, which is why we have that live text layer still there, so that if we need to go back and make a change, it works. Sometimes I'll just option click it and keep it here, so that if I make sure that it's good before I bother creating the outlines. And then now I want to scale it down. So I've edited the shortcut in Illustrator so that I can do Command-Shift-W, and that was supposed to bring up a menu. I don't know what's happening here. I'm going to edit that out though. Okay, well that's not working right now. Anyways, you can go to Object, Transform, Scale. My notes say to do this down to 60, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep it uniform, and I turn the preview on so that you can see just how small it's going to get. You know, we'll make that 70 this time around. So now I have uneditable text that is ready to be put into balloons. So I'll option click down one of my templated balloons up here. I set the stroke on these to 75, or 0.75 I should say. I think it's I think the ones are higher, a little too heavy, which I used to use until I realized I could do this. So I'm going to highlight, you'll see my text is on top of my balloon here, even though it's on the same layer, so that's good. So that means you can see the text when you're shaping your balloon. I'm going to highlight them both and use my shortcut that I created to align them so that it puts it in the center as close as it can be. Sometimes you'll have to eyeball it and make sure it looks good yourself. And then I'm going to click the outer corner and hold Command and Shift to keep Option and Shift to keep everything uniform as I scale it down. And I will choose a reasonable amount of air to include in that balloon. That's what it's called. The space around the text is air, which makes sense. So I'm going to go with about that size this time, and I'm going to repeat the process here for the next balloon. Make sure you only select what you're looking for. So again, I highlighted and then I used my action to center it. You can also do that yourself manually with, I'll show you on the next one. So I got those two balloons there. And you can go up to your toolbar here, which is just the basic toolbar, I believe. I don't think I had to put this in special. And highlight horizontal, you see it moves once. Highlight vertical, I did that backwards. And you got them both again. My shortcut just kind of combines that and does it a lot quicker. So then I'll just kind of eyeball the air around it again. And now I've got something I can start placing. Although, you know what, let's do this one. Jane's got a line in this as well. So we'll break it up and make it and shape it a bit. I don't have as much room for Jane to play with because you don't want to cover up too much of the art, so we'll just kind of go with that. That looks good enough. You see how the middle line is a little wider than the ones around it. In this case, we have this little flat guy here, but that's all right. So I will create outlines again. I don't know why my scale isn't working. That's annoying. I think it might have to do with the screen capture software interfering. So again, we'll scale that down, and we got another balloon here. So because this is relatively close, I'll just copy this one as my starting point and drag it out to make it larger, because I'm going to scale it down in a second. Use my action to center it, and then again, just kind of eyeball it. This guy might be a little too wide on one side. If you want to adjust just one side, you can use your A selection, which is just your, what does they call it? Individual selection, I think? Direct selection versus your whole selection. So you click this point, and then I just hit it up with the arrow keys on my keyboard. And I'll do that again here just to make it even. Go back to selecting with V, which is the filled in arrow versus the empty arrow, the white arrow. And we'll just squeeze that in a little bit. Lettering is about a lot of tiny details that you notice, but somebody else might not realize. Just one little nudge can make all the difference. So now let's start placing these things. Again, I'm not going to worry too much about this live area, although I'll try to stick within it where possible. So I'm going to put Quinn's first line here. That's Quinn. Put his line there. And you're allowed to put objects outside the live area, but try to keep text wherever possible. I know you guys are lettering it probably at a manga size, so you'll have to find those dimensions, or you'll be provided those dimensions and run with them. So another thing that you want to watch out for is called tangents. And a tangent is when you're placing your balloon or art or really anything, and say you place it against this line, and then this happens. This is where like your balloon or your whatever sound effect butts up against a flat surface like this, or sometimes it's vertical like this, and is horribly distracting. And editors see it, artists see it, letterers see it. It's awful. So you want to try to keep that in mind when you're placing your text. We don't want to cover up the art, so we're keeping this along the top. We can cover up his thumb a little bit though. And you see that this kind of cuts in the middle and not the edge, so that's okay. And we'll nudge it up to avoid the tangent here. And that looks alright, so we'll go back out to the full screen by, in this case, Command 0 to see all your entire artboard to find our other piece of text. And we'll place this somewhere around here. This is just where it's up to you, wherever you think is best. Try not to cover up anything important like the board, because that's kind of necessary, and we'll have the tail going near there anyways. But, and I'm sorry for just cracking my knuckles into the microphone. Save early, save often. So Adobe CS6 does not have autosave, but I happen to have a some sort of a plugin edition thing that reminds me to do so. I think Creative Cloud finally added it. I don't know why it took them so long. It's the most necessary thing ever, because if your power goes out, or if your computer breaks or shuts down and you lose your page, you have to start over, and you don't want to do that, especially if you're on a deadline. So I've already got a page saved. I will save it again. I think it was because I moved the folder, so we'll put it back into the Jane demo and save over it. Just save it in your version. I don't really mess with these settings at all. So an option, one of your options is to place all the text first if you like, and then do the tails and stuff. But for right now, I'll show you an example of the tail and connector creation. So I'm going to want to connect Quinn's second line here to his third line, and I'll do that by using the pen tool and making a connector that goes over Jane's head. So I've got a selection there filled with the default colors of black and white, and I will go to my offset path, which can also be found under Object, Path, Offset Path, but rather than getting the little pop-up window and that's, you know, obviously way too large, I've already created the action that takes care of that, and I'm going to do it at 0.15. So I'm going to select it and hit play, and I've got my offset path. So we'll delete the original. In fact, I think I'm going to move this over just a little bit. We get his hand is there. We don't need to see it necessarily. And you can even tighten this bend so it's a little bit more even. And I'm going to option click one of my tails here because, again, time saver and laziness. So create your tools, and then you can reuse them as much as you like. And on that subject, I have another file that I keep and use constantly called Symbol Palette Prep, because I was going to make this into symbols palette so I can just click on them like they were swatches. So I have a bunch of shapes that I reuse a lot, and when I need them, I go into this file and I copy, select what I need, which is often these guys down here. These curved off-panel tails are a pain. So make a couple, transform and reflect, and save them all separately. So I'll, you know, select one of these, which I probably will end up using at some point, and paste it anywhere. Put it up here. Move it to the back if necessary, which is Command Shift bracket, and that changes their order of in the layer, which is helpful for certain things, but not really for that. And then I'll even take my eyedropper and select another object with the stroke I want to save having to do that manually. The eyedropper keyboard shortcut is I. So I have my balloon, my tails, and my my connector. So let's zoom in a little bit here and make sure everything's okay. You don't want this necessarily to butt up against. You don't need a super long tail when it's obvious who's speaking, but the trick is to make it point to the mouth. So just kind of eyeball it and nudge it in place. I use the arrow keys to move things up or to the sides at 1 pixel at a time. And then to combine, I will select one thing, shift, select all the objects I want to merge into one big object, big path, and you can go to make compound shape, which then combines them and moves everything to the top because everything is in a different place in the layer, so it tries to keep it even. Which I'll then do, I'll then move it down to the bottom so that I can see my text and make sure everything looks good. And then if I need to, I can select everything and adjust the placement a little bit so that the tail here doesn't point directly to the edge here and make another annoying tangent. What I've done though is I've created a shortcut that does all that stuff in one swoop. So I have this here, and my shortcut is Function Shift F2. So let's do redo all that, and I'll use my shortcut. So I select everything. Typically I do it this way, where I just select everything and unselect the text. Function Shift F2. You see it did all that stuff in 1 second, and you can tell it does it because it unfolds it, which is really annoying. I'd like to keep those folded up, but I can't seem to figure out how. So I've got Quinn's first lines taken care of. We'll back out, and you can see what it looks like placed. And now for Jane's, let's move this down here. I don't think it needs to be right there, although it does cover Quinn's junk, if you ladies are into that thing. So we'll nudge it so that again, we'll nudge it again so that it's not a tangent to his pants, and we'll back out one more time. And because I have these things set up already, which has a flat side and a slightly curved side, I'll start with this and thin it out a little bit. I like my tails very thin. I like the lettering small so that it doesn't block too much of the art. It's easy to read. And I like my tails thin because then they're out of the way. See, the connector is very thin here. So I start with this, and I want to put a little bend in it, but I'm not great with the pen tool. So I'll make something straight, for example, and I'll go down to Effect, Warp, Arc. Turn my preview on so I see what's happening, and you can see that you can adjust the angle and the shape of a bend to make it a lot more uniform and even. So we'll stick with this 30 here, and I'll hit OK, and you can see that it's just an effect on there. So that's the original and the result. The original is still editable, so I can click on this anchor point here and adjust, and it'll be reflected in the result there. I'm going to highlight, I'm going to click and drag to keep a copy if I need to go back to, but I'm going to first expand this, because if I rotate it, it'll adjust the percentage of the bend and make it look weird, and nobody wants that. So we will expand the appearance. Because there's a stroke and an outline, you have to then refill it. As you see at the top here, it is question marks because it's not filled with anything. And there's more than one layer that are filled differently. So we'll eyedrop the nearest thing that we want to copy, and now I can move this so that it's in a better place and is more or less pointing to Jane's mouth. And one more time, I'll select that and my balloon, and I will use my shortcut action, Function Shift F2, to combine everything into one handy little path. So the next panel has some dialogue, and order is important here. Now this time, because there's only so much space to work with, and because we've already seen the board here, we've established that there is a drawing board here. We're getting a little close-up of a shot, but it's not necessary. You see Jane is covering up the guy's face anyways, because it'll be revealed down here, so we can cover this up if we need to, because Jane is a talkie of a comic. I like my dialogue, especially when it's back and forth and snappy. So we have a lot of it. We try to write a little cinematically at times, or like it was a TV show. So I'll start with Quinn's next line, which is this, "What do you got?" And I've already, some of them are more obvious than others on how to break or shape your text. I tend to go for taller than wide so I could have kept it like this with its space, and then that's right. That's going to get annoying. Scale it down, and I could have made a balloon to kind of work around that. But I don't think it looks so good when I do it this way. It seems too misshapen. Sometimes you're fixed into that because of the art you're provided, and sometimes you can make it look nicer. So we will scale it down to 70 and put our balloon around it. and deflate the balloon so that it looks even. You want it as centered as you can possibly get it, and if that means nudging in the sides a little bit, then nudge in the sides a little bit. Because this line is longer and has the top there, I tend to leave a little bit more space, or sometimes I'll even just bump the top down while keeping the bottom where it is. So Quinn's line will go up here, and again, for laziness sake, we will copy one of my pre-made tails, which is kind of a stubbier version of the ones right above it. And you'll see that I have them pointing in a starting position of a few different directions so that I don't have to bother to transform and reflect them each time. And then I'll also maybe even sometimes make a set that's scaled down a little so that I don't have to do that manually either, like I am doing right now. But these are all generally done custom. I don't have 30 degrees, 15 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees that these are rotated to, although I probably should. Maybe one day. So I'm going to combine that, and now Quinn's taken care of up here, so we don't really need that anymore. I'll see my script then as this entire line here, but we're going to break that up because that's how people talk. They take pauses and they break, and they don't spit everything out in one long chunk like they do in comics all the time. So we'll start and make 3 copies, and I'll delete the stuff I don't want so that I have what I do want. So I'm going to break up the sentences basically. And then I'm left with 3 smaller balloons. So again, I will then, let's delete that, we don't need that anymore. This I might need to use again because I'll have something at a similar angle that I want to adjust the amount of the bend on. So I'll leave that in there. And I will copy my text down and then start shaping it. You want narrow on top where possible and wider in the middle. Sometimes you have to be a little unconventional, and sometimes the bottom will be too wide because I don't generally use hyphenations and whatnot unless it's a clear hyphenation. Like this is an example where it's not a word being split in half and hyphenated. It's a actual hyphenated word. I tend to avoid hyphenating when it's in the middle of a line and it's splitting a word in half, but if you have to, and sometimes it's unavoidable, at least split it at the syllable. So if it's, let's see if an example. So for anything, you would split at the any because that's your syllable. It'll automatically, if it's one word like this, actually let me show you what it looks like when it does it normally. So if you resize, you see that anything gets split where it should. In this case, it generally knows what it's doing, but if you have to adjust it so that you have a couple more, another syllable or two at the end, you can do so. But again, it kind of splits the word so it's readable. So we'll select the text, and that one's not going to change, so I'll just create an outline there. And we'll repeat with these guys here. Oh. So I'll sometimes put my top and bottom in so that I know, and you want to keep them as close to evenly matched as possible. So you see the number of letters is relatively close. So we'll keep it like that. And that's probably good enough. You will have the dangling word, and that's part of comics lettering. It's just for better shaping. Although if this was any other kind of graphic design, you would not necessarily do that. Those are called orphans. You want to avoid those in normal graphic design. And one more time, we'll take the you had and put the by now at the bottom and kind of shape it so it's a general thin to wide to thin ratio. So now we'll create these as outlines, but I still have my originals to go back to if I screw up. And I'll go down to Object, Transform, Scale one more time, which will happen a lot, which is a better option than me having text that looks like this and then having to literally hover over and make sure that it looks the same. Very handy thing I picked up and saves me countless time. So one more time to the Object, I've used a lot of these TV shaped balloons, which are not quite so oval, and they're a little wider. They're named after old school 40s and 50s tube TVs in the shape of their screen. And I did that once years ago, and have just been copying this one and resizing it ever since. So I will nudge that and shape that a bit. How you make one of those, I'll show you, is to find your ellipse, and again, Option and Shift to make it even. Actually, you don't even have to. Just drag it on an ellipse. I'll go to Select, Object, Add Direction Handles, which again I've also made into a shortcut because I used to do these every single time I made one, and that was stupid. So that adds these handles, which means that when you resize, it does it evenly on all sides. And then I will go down to my tool here and Scale. And I'm going to hold Option and Shift and click. Whoa, that's not good. I don't believe it's scale now that I think about it. Oh. I'm going to level with you. I don't remember how to do this, but it is part of my my PowerPoint that I put together for Ladies Night last year, so there is a how-to in there, which I will give you a link to and or a copy of along with this tutorial. So we'll forget it entirely. Forget I did any of that. Maybe I'll even edit that out. Probably not. So I'll just keep making my balloons, talking to myself like a crazy person, and I'll place them. So we know what's going on here. Like I said, we can cover up some of this art, but you want to try to keep eye lines at least open so that you can tell that they're talking to each other. And you want to keep the order, your reading order, in there as well. This will be our first budding border, so I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And that'll be our second one. Handy dandy. And we will avoid tangents again where possible. Lettering is nothing but finesse, making sure it all looks good and is technically sound. You don't want distracting lettering because it takes away from the story and it is really distracting. There's books that I can't read because I don't like their lettering. So since I have this guy here, I'll make a copy of him. I'll expand it again by going to Object, Expand Appearance. I'll make sure that it's filled the way I want it to be filled. And then I'll rotate. So I'll hold Shift and I'll, with my selection tool, I'll make sure I have the corner arrow turned on or in place when I click, and then I'll rotate it around that way. With Shift on, it breaks it up into 45-degree movements because that's even and nice. So I'm going to have this poke around this way for Jane's line, and to make sure that it points the right place, I'll rotate it a bit more and adjust the placement and zoom in to make sure I'm not doing any tangents with the tail. And it points, it's a little bit bent too much, but I can make it work if I just kind of play with it and see where it sits and all that. That's no good. Alright, back to the drawing board. So we'll just do this. We'll draw a straight one that's not too thick or not too thin, and then I will make sure it's selected and then go back to my effect. Arc is my last used effect, so I will reuse it. And invariably, whatever you want, it is never the correct place, so you'll always have to adjust it. Whatever, if you bent it down before, now you'll need it bent up, so you'll have to move it. And you kind of keep an eye on the severity of that. I generally don't use the distortion too much because it looks weird. So get it where where you think it looks good. Keep it at 20 in this case, and we'll copy another version of it so that there's a backup. I will expand it, which I probably should make a keyboard shortcut for, but just haven't yet, and tweak. At a certain point, sometimes there's nowhere that it'll work that won't look weird and does what you're trying to do, and this might be that point. So we'll just settle, because otherwise this tutorial will take forever. So, with selection on, I will select the tail, the balloons, and everything, and I will combine them. That didn't work because this was unfilled. That's why you fill it. It doesn't matter that it's set at 1 inch right now, or 1 point I should say, because my shortcut will take care of that and thin it back up. But now you see that you have things against panel walls, and you don't want to break panel here. So what I do is I select it and turn it down and use the marquee tool. In this case it's even. Sometimes you might have to use the pen tool to freehand it. And I'll draw a box around it that lines up with the panel walls. Turn off the stroke so that you can see that it's flush up against where it should be. So then select the object below, and I will bring it back up to full opacity. And again, I've made a shortcut for this, but this is a clipping mask. Normally you could use you could put a box over this half of it, the half you want to cut off, and then go to the Pathfinder menu and use -front to remove, to kind of make an even cut. But in case you have to go back and edit things, I've learned to start using clipping masks. Clipping masks will take the shape that's on top and trim off the excess around it. So I don't want the extra balloons here to be included. So we have the box on top. We'll select that and the path, just the path. You don't need the letters. That'll screw everything up. And you go to Object, Clipping Mask, and Make, or you can use Command 7. You can also find it under the Pathfinder drop-down here. But again, I've made it into a action, so on my keyboard I have it set to make the clipping mask and then move it to the back so the text is on top and readable. And I have that set to a keyboard shortcut of Function Shift F3. Voila, nice and neat. And then if you had to go back and edit it, you'd select, you can release clipping mask, and now you can adjust. And Adobe CS6 has isolation mode, which means if you double click on something, you can move it without having to remake your shape. And it kind of keeps everything in place. A very handy tool, which you use a lot in sound effects, actually, so that everything stays one object. So that's 2 panels down. We're getting there. We're doing it, guys. The next panel will have some captions, and captions have rules all to themselves. The next panel will also have sound effects, but I generally do sound effects last. So, the next line, media dubbed him the Knight Rider. Again, because it's going to go in a caption box, you want to make it look like a rectangle, because that's what we're going to be copying here. And actually, let me go ahead and make that 0.75 now, so that I don't have to bother when I copy it later. So, figuring out where to place is key. In this case, we wanted to avoid the art of this board because that was our necessary prop here. We wanted to avoid the people. Where possible, you do not cover heads. We know that's his hand there, so we don't really care if we cover that. In here, I could have moved this line up here and then done these 2 down here and not covered quite so much, but it doesn't really matter. They both look good as long as the reading order is fine. Ideally, you want to imagine all the text on the page as a single ribbon of line. So, like, if I was tracing it, if I was reading it with my finger, I could figure out the order very easily. So in this case, it starts at the top, goes down here because it's all in the same panel, and then again, top and right to left. You know how to read. You're reading right now, but you want to keep some sort of page flow so that the reader eye is led around the page to pick up all the art, and you're doing so invisibly, subtly. It's manipulation, is what it is. We're manipulators. So the next line should probably go somewhere around here, because that's where your eye would go to next after you've read this line. You've already looked at the art. So we're going to put this media's dubbed him the Knight Rider line here. Captions, when they're spoken, you put quotes on them. when they're internal, like Batman's thinking to himself, then you put them in italics. And then if you have like an emphasis word, you make that unitalicized. So because this is the first of several immediate quotes, if you've ever read a prose book, you know that when people have dialogue that cuts through paragraphs, you have an open quote on the first one, and then you open a quote each paragraph after that. So that's what we're going to do here because grammar's fun. So we will select that and convert it into an outline because I'm not going to adjust that too much. And then I will scale it. Again, I really wish that keyboard shortcut would work, but it's being overridden. And we'll option click Jane's colored caption here. So you'll end up closing those captions on your last one of that page, last uninterrupted one. So again, you just shape the same amount of air thing, it's just instead of round, it's a rectangle, and avoid your tangents. That's as good a place as any to put it, so that's where we're going to put it down there. We have 2 more captions in this panel, which you can see is large, and we don't want to hide the fact that there's a bike here because that's the next set of dialogue there, and we don't want to have the mugger out of frame either because then what's he there to fight? This area right here is perfect because you can see that it's a thug. He's wearing a mask, and you know what an arm and shoulder looks like from the back, so there's no real need to see that. Then we'll work our sound effects in here later on. So I'm going to move that to where I can work with it, and I'm going to split this in half as well, just for ease of reading. Nobody likes to read large chunks of text. If you can break stuff down into bullets or single lines wherever possible, do it. So because these are all continuing Jane's line, we're going to leave the open quote at the front, and because this is her last line for now, because we're going to go back and get dialogue and that'll interrupt this thought, we're going to close it on the last one. So we'll reshape it. If you just scale it to start, you can get away with a lot of stuff. We're going to want to put the ne'er-do-well on its own line because that's one big hyphenated word. And 10 speed can stay as it is. We'll put the at night on its own because it just looks better that way. And we have a general square shape here, which is pretty good to go with. It'd be weird if it went like this. That's unnecessary, especially for a caption. Think about what it'll look like and keep it simple. And then we'll do that again with this guy. We'll put the low-level stuff on its own line and break up things like that. And we'll leave an orphan. Low-level stuff there. Okay, so we have these 2 here. We will convert them to outlines and scale them. One of these days I'll remember where that is. So everything's being done evenly. Very handy, very nice. We will copy our box, get a rough, larger shape and center, and resize, and repeat. So I'm just option clicking so I don't have to copy and paste. Very handy in the Adobe suite. I think you can do it in Photoshop as well. But keep some sort of consistent sizing around all sides. So it looks pretty good there. We'll then place it over our shoulder where we decided to put it already. Again, avoiding for any tangents. We can nudge that down so it's in the fence nicer there. And one more below it. Another trick I will use right here to make sure everything lines up along the right here, because I want them to be lined up like that, is I'll group these 2, and then so that when I click them both, the path and the text is part of that group when I select it. And I will select them both, and I will align right horizontally so that now these sides are flush. The next text does go this way, so we're gonna mess up the flow a little bit. Actually, you know what? Let's try it this way. Let's select this and shoot this over so that it kind of swings. So it kind of swings around in a curve back down to this left panel here, which is Quinn's next line. Now because we're going to butt this against the top so that there's enough room for all this dialogue here, we will break the text up thusly. Actually, we'll do it a little thinner. You can kind of keep track of how many lines high something is, because you will need to do that at times. And this way we create the wider middle that we want. So we'll copy that, transform and scale, lather and rinse and repeat. Put the balloon around it. Sometimes it just works where you don't even have to adjust a side, and that's great. Anytime you can save time doing this is excellent, because letterers often have the least amount of time to work, and they get it the last, and it needs to get to the printers as soon as possible. So we'll flatten that out so it doesn't look terrible, and we'll put this here for now. Probably end up shifting its exact placement and bringing the sides a little, because we can. Now Jane's got this large block here, so what I'm going to actually do is break up the other line, because space is a premium in the next panel. Oh, did that backwards. So we'll have her say it in here, and we'll have the rest of her line be paid off in the next panel, which is good for flow. I think in like a script you would call that pre-lap instead of overlap. So we'll break up this guy here. Again, my bolds are knocked down a point so that they're not enormous, but they are still bold. I don't like the spacing between these two letters, so I will fix the kerning. I will fix the kerning, which I will show you up close. Kerning is the amount of space between letters. Undo that. So that they're readable. And I don't like the level here, so we'll go over here and find the kerning, which is a setting under the characters, and I'm just going to use Option and the arrow keys, which is a way to do a keyboard shortcut for editing that. And we'll just make some more room so that it's clear that it's two words. And that's much better. And we've got our thing shaped there. And then I actually am going to keep this one big block of text, because sometimes people do ramble on. I'm going to date myself with a reference here, but if you ever watch Blossom back in the 90s, her best friend was a little like the Micro Machine guy in that she would talk fast and rapid fire, and that's what Jane's doing here because she's panicking. So we'll shape it so it's roughly ovular. That's a word, right? That's a word now. So it's a little egg-shaped, and actually we'll nudge this it down on its own on the next line so that it's even more so. And so now we have Jane's 3 lines here. We'll copy a backup copy off of there so that if I screw up, I can go back without having to undo too much. I'm going to create outlines and scale. And I'm going to borrow this balloon here and center it, and then adjust from there, bring in the sides a little bit. This one might be a little tight in the panel there, so I might use a little less of air in the balloons, but I try to keep it so that it's unnoticeable. And we'll shape, and then because we can, we'll reuse this down here because it saves time and effort and all that other good stuff that we will put into the sound effects shortly. So I've got her next 3 lines, which will, because of order of speaking, this first balloon here will overlap Quinn's line so that you know that Jane is speaking after him. We'll move that over also because we can. There's nothing important to cover here, so we can put this giant block where we need it. And these are all going to be one big path, so we'll nudge stuff around to make it look good. I don't know if there's any real hard and fast rule about where to put the arrow of the tail coming from the balloon. Some people would put it here because it's right next to her mouth. Some people put it where the text starts. or the line starts rather. Some people would have it go from the bottom, although not in this kind of placement because that would look terrible. So first I will pull down one of my objects, and this is going to be Quinn's arrow, or tail, I keep saying arrow. And so I'll just rotate it vertically so I can put a little bit of a bend in it like I did with arc, although this time it'll be a vertical arc. And again, whatever you used last time is probably the opposite of what you actually need. So we'll put the preview on and you can see that horizontal arc is not what you want because it makes it look ridiculous. So you click vertical and then it bends it the way you actually want it to. And we want it to go the other way because that's how it works. And you don't want it to be too ridiculous. I mean, that's unnecessary unless it has to go around a very specific kind of shaped object. Subtle is key. Again, letterers are invisible. If you did your job if nobody notices your work. And anything ridiculous like that is distracting, which I also find the thick tails distracting at times, so I avoid them. So I'll narrow that down and make a copy to expand and fill in with the eyedropper. And now it's good to be to be placed. So now I can rotate it, and actually I'm going to transform and reflect it so that it points the other way, and that's very easy to do. Vertical or horizontal is pretty key, and you'll use these all the time too. So I'll use a little bit of a longer tail, even though it's not really necessary. You know who's going to be speaking because it's going to be clear, and Jane's going to have her own tail in a second as well. But again, try to point it towards the mouth, and you want to have it as close to the center, pointing like the center. Figure that there's like a little dot in the center that you want each side of the tail to be on. But also try to make it point at the mouth, which we did there. We're going to make that a compound shape, and now it's in the back. And while we're at it, we'll just go in and make our budding border, because we can. So we'll select those two. We don't want to select the text because that'll be part of your clipping mask and it'll mess everything up. And because I have my keyboard shortcut, I will just have it do that. And now it's on the bottom so that it's clear that Jane's line is on top, meaning that he spoke and now she's speaking next above her. Stacking text is an art unto itself, and sometimes it's clear why it's done that way and sometimes it's less so. Sometimes it's just however the layer works out. So I'm going to copy this tail down because that's small and unobtrusive and exactly where I need it to be. I just adjust where it's pointing slightly. This will all be combined into one compound shape. Oh, I just made a clipping mask. Nope. Reselect everything, but not the top clipping mask. There we go. So now, because I have it set to move to back, I will select all that. I will select the entire thing, text and all, not that, and do Command Shift right bracket to move it to the top of the layers. So if you see it in your layers, you see that the group here, which is all of these paths, except for this one apparently, are together. You can see all the little objects that go in there, and grouping it keeps them all together on the, you can see all the little individual letters. Grouping it keeps it together in your layer hierarchy. It generally doesn't matter the placement of those on the layer, unless it's for specific things like this, or sound effect things when you're in the isolation mode. So I've moved Jane's line to the next panel here, so we're going to make that the remainder of that line a new caption. Those all look good, so we can delete their originals. Move this down here. I've already used that top line, so I'll get rid of that. And we'll shape it so it's and for captions, try to make them the same width if possible. Because she is speaking this off panel, we'll add quotes. You'll see that I started the quotes over because Quinn's line here broke up the quote shuffle here. And this is the only line in that panel because this is the last panel, so we'll close it as well. Create outlines, scale, Bob's your uncle. You create outlines because that's what printers request because they don't always have these fonts. And also it's part of the license, which means that if you give it to someone and they edit it, it somehow violates the terms of the license that you get for buying the font or using the freebie. Because this is just a giant close-up of Quinn's head, we don't want to cover up too much. So we'll try to nest the text up here as much as possible. Again, I'm trying to keep it in the live area, even though I don't really have to because this will be for print. And then Quinn's line will get nestled down in here. So we'll try to shape it so that it'll fit in that area, especially when scaled. Put it back the way. So we'll break a little rule here and keep this kind of uniform. Because otherwise it'll look weird, especially if you have it set like this. Single word on top, single word on bottom, but then you have a shorter word above it. That looks terrible. So leave that as is. Create outlines, Command Shift O again. Object, scale, bring it down. And here's a neat thing you can do. If you already have a shape that's generally pretty close to one you want to use, you can double click it to go into isolation mode, and then you can select it with copy inside isolation mode, which lets you adjust just this object, even with your selection tool. It splits these without actually breaking them apart, so that you have to reform them. Very handy, very easy, good for editing. But I'm going to hit Command C to copy. I'm going to go out of isolation mode. I'm going to paste it, and now it's a new path on the layer here. We'll close that up because we don't need to see that. And I can use it to move that to the bottom so I can see my text and how it fits in here. And I can use that as my base so I don't have to start from 0. I can start from like 5 or so. And we'll adjust the bottom and drag that out and then maybe realign it. And that looks pretty good. So again, we don't want to put it on his face where possible, but we're going to use its small tail because it's there. And we already have one pointing in that direction, so I'll just kind of pull that and rotate and adjust and make a compound shape out of it. So that's all our dialogue. We're done. We can get rid of these since we probably won't need them again. You know what? I'm going to move these captions this time around so that it does guide the reader a bit more. And I'll even overlap it because I don't want to overdo that space. But without covering too much. We don't need to see the mugger's bathing suit area there. But you see the page kind of flows in this way, which I would totally draw on if I was good with the pen tool. But it starts here, it drops down here, comes back up here, swings around, leads the reader down the page this way, and down so that the reading order is set. And that way we don't have 3 captions here, and with this one here looking distracting, meaning like thinking you should be reading directly down. And then it ends down in this corner. So now we have 2 sound effects we're going to use. Sound effects are extremely difficult, especially if you have to write them, because they're not always included in your script, but the scenes need them because you want to see some sort of sound associated with this guy getting kicked in the face or this hand breaking. This is where having a robust font library is very handy, but also it's a little double-edged in that you have to sift through a lot more options now. So I want something a little rough. You see I have some 500. We can start at the top. I generally start at the top and then kind of go down and see the ones that will be of use. 95% of the fonts on this computer are strictly for comic books or to make a logo parody of sorts. So a lot of these are Blambot, a lot of these are Comic Craft, and then some other independent creators have made their own that I'll use. I really wish they would group a lot better. Like all the Blambots could go together, all the Comic Crafts go together, like they already do, because they all start with CC. I'm going to use something with a little bit of tooth to it, something that's a little bit jagged, to kind of convey that this is a hand being broken, or at least a finger being broken, or something being broken. The first time around I used a font called 12-ton fish stick, but I'm going to use, I think I'm going to go with, where is it? Battle Scarred. And I almost always put it in italics, because it gives it some sort of some shearing already without me having to do that work. So you see that there's some jags there. It looks like it was made for Ben Grimm, basically, punching things. This is one I picked up on the sale. Very handy. I've already used it a whole bunch. So I'll make a copy that I can then convert to outlines. I'll enlarge it, and then I will start my shaping. And I generally shape by going into, put it near the thing I'm actually doing, probably it wouldn't hurt. I always shape by going into isolation mode. So I can pick up individual letters and rotate them and adjust sizing and stuff like that. You want to try to make the sound look as though it was emanating from the thing that it's supposed to be making the sound for. So think of like the Doppler effect a little bit. Think of how sound travels, how it's wider at some ends and louder because that sound is closer to you, whereas the part that's before it is thinner and lighter because that's how sound travels. Go for some unconventional placements because it is a finger being snapped or hand or some sort of damage is being done, and that's painful and jarring, so you don't have to make everything quite so even. It's also possible that some of you will be drawing your sound effects into the art, which is quite alright as well, and I always enjoy because it saves me a lot of time in having to do them myself. They're the most time-consuming thing because they're case by case, whereas dialogue is all kind of the same principle. But we want the snap to be largest, so we'll highlight those and enlarge and make it so that they're clearly bigger than the beginning, as though the beginning and the end were the quietest parts of the snapping. And you know what we're going to do is we're going to make a very thin outline and make it the default color of black and white just to see it overlap. So what I'm going to do is adjust this just a little bit more. If you're ambitious, you can even get in and adjust the anchor point so that it's shaped a little bit more how you want it. If you want the tail or the leg of the S to be a little bit bigger. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to take these three letters and I'm going to make a compound shape so that they are all one object, and you can see that the T floats on top of it. This is still too thick though. We're going to make that just so you can tell that there's a stacking being done here. And we'll adjust the S so that it's clearly readable and also it looks like it's being stacked upon. Now that's pretty good as it is, so we'll take that here. You want to put the sound effect so that it looks like it's coming from the thing that it's emanating from, but without covering it up too much. So up here there's nothing too important. You can still see that it's coming from the hand area. You don't really care that it is covering this purse strap or the coins, but you want to back out and make sure that the size is right. That's probably too big and too thick, so we'll narrow it down and adjust and then re-rotate. And you also want to pick a color that will pop against the other colors. This is why sound effects, I think they used to be done by the colorist. You would just leave them blank, they would fill it in. But I feel like letterers do that more now in the digital age, but you have to generally wait until the page has been colored so that you know what not to use and what to use. I'm going to load a set of swatches that is a giant comic book palette that I use quite a bit. I don't remember where I found this exactly. I think I Googled. And I like this, I like using this light yellow for sound effects, especially on something like this. It kind of looks like it's not too out of place. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go with a little, I want to try to make it a little different than the caption boxes here so that they stand on their own. But you also can tell that there's nothing really to it. So I'm going to make a copy behind it. Command C and Command B. Paste it back. And then I'm going to thicken the stroke so that there's a little bit of heft to it. So that it looks like this, where you still have your inner outline so that you see that this is still on top. But then you also have this thick one behind it. And then, center that all so it looks right. You know what, I'm going to undo this. I don't like the way that looks. I'm going to release that compound shape. And again, put these back down to 0.25. And recolor. So now I see that there's a stack, but I still have my giant thick outline around the whole thing. Simple colors tend to work best, I think, with sound effects, though you can use gradients from time to time for however you want it to look, for whatever effect you're going for. But that's pretty good for that sound effect up there. We'll rotate it just a little bit so that it's a little bit more level. And the P and the T kind of... Actually, we'll thread the needle a little bit more. Now for the other one, I'm probably going to reuse the same sound effects. In this case, I used Pico's basic italic because it comes with these ligatures, which are when two letters are together, they act differently than these two letters who are together, so that it's all one object. But it's already done a lot of the work for me because I want those big O's to really make a thud, like an impact. So we'll copy that off and convert to outlines and enlarge it. Set it to default so we can actually see what we're working with. And go into isolation mode. So we're going to make one of these O's bigger. And if I go further into isolation mode, I can adjust the inner points as well, and even offset it for effect, so that this side is thicker, this side is thicker, these are thinner, to really make it look like there's some chaos in there. And back into single isolation mode. Kind of rotate that a little bit so that they look like they're interlocking. They're going to get combined into one compound shape in a second, because I'm going to keep all these. I'm going to make one giant compound shape for this boomf. So we'll make the B a little smaller and tighter, and the double O's larger, and the MFs a little smaller still. But you don't want to keep them where they are. You want to play with them a little bit so that it doesn't look like you just use a font, even though you clearly did. But it gives it a little bit more of a hand-done feel when things are adjusted. We'll move this grouping together. And now that everything's overlapping the way it should, we will go down and make a compound shape. So now when you fill it in with a color, it fills it all uniformly. Because there's little breaks here and where it overlapped. So this will be a bit bigger, because he's getting kicked in the face after all, and we'll offset it and put it in somewhere in these stars so that it all gets associated for me. The artist took care of putting in some accents. You can also make your own stars by going to the path tool and the star tool and clicking on holding option to make it even, but you can, which adjusts the how narrow the points are, and shift will keep it level. But then I believe you can also, so if you want to make your own stars, you could, and you wanted 6-pointed stars, you could click and drag and then use the arrow keys to add points or remove them down to a triangle, which is unnecessary because there's a triangle shape. Very handy. You don't know how long it took me to learn that. So like you can get your points and use the option key to adjust how thick they are. But that's unnecessary because of our artist. So we want to bring some color to this guy as well, but this is just going to be one solid color. I don't think a gradient is necessary. Let's go for something maybe red, because red and pain can be associated all the time. And again, it's different than all the other colors on the page, so it does stand out a bit. But let's add a drop shadow this time, so it looks like there's some movement to it. So I've Command C, Command B, and then I use the arrow keys to kind of tweak it so it looks like there's a little bit of a shadow. We want the shadow to be black, so we're going to select black. It doesn't really matter if there's a stroke on it or not in this case. We'll leave it there because it adds a little thickness to it. And then you can see that there's some depth mixed into the sound effect here. You can see it mostly on the edges here, how the B cuts in like that, and the F has a little extra room here, a little 75-degree angle of sorts. And we will zoom out and see that our page is done. That looks pretty good to me. I'm not going to make any adjustments. It's pretty good as it is. It flows. It has sound effects that pop and don't blend in to the other elements that you put in there, like the captions color, because that's the only other thing with color. It goes well enough with the colors behind it, the purple in this case, and the black and white for shading. And again, it more or less flows so that it's readable for the casual reader. And normally what I would do is export this directly from here. There's no sense in copying these individually and pasting them into Photoshop. For one, these are vectors, which means they can be scaled and resized and not lose crispness or fidelity. Although you can't read it, it is very crystal clear, as you can see. And when you move it into Photoshop, you're using raster-based pixels, which I don't fully understand, but they're not scalable. Eventually, if you zoom in far enough, you can see pixels, and it's not good. So you want your letters to be very crisp. So from here, I tend to export. Actually, usually I save as, and I will save as a PDF. And it'll automatically pick up the artboard here. So in this case, all this stuff is going to be included, the trim marks and all. And that's okay for right now. And you'll get your menu options. And I always tend to, if it's going to be printed, go with press quality. And then you can see in your Finder that you have your high-res PDF. So when you quickly look at it, you see that all the text is super crisp. It looks good. It doesn't look jagged or pixely, and is exactly where you placed it. Another option you can do if you don't want to do PDF is you can go to Export, and let's make this into a JPEG. So you choose your format. This time we will use the artboard because otherwise it'll pick up all this junk and all the live text, and we don't want that because then your file will be super wide. And I just held my hands up even though you can't see them. So it'll pick the artboard. In this case, it'll pick all of them. It'll even throw out a number at the end so that you know, in case you have more than one artboard, that this is the one you saved. So you'll export, and you want, for print, you'll want it for CMYK. I don't fully understand this, but you'll probably want it at least at 300 points, sometimes more. 300 is pretty standard, though. I don't understand the anti-aliasing is making sure that the lines are as crisp and tight and non-jagged as possible, but I don't know what hinted means. So it seems to work well, so I go with it. This is going to be a large file because it is for print, so you want it as high quality as you can get it. You can adjust this if you're just putting it on the web or otherwise. And if you are putting it on the web, you can probably put it into CMYK. Not that you'll have too much of it because most of your stuff will be black and white, but for the color stuff, it could affect how it's viewed since it will be viewed on a monitor and not on paper. And then you can save it. Oop. And in your Finder, you will also have your JPEG, which is super high quality at almost 10 megabytes, whereas the PDF is 4.5 or so. And then if you were doing a whole bunch, you could then combine all your PDFs into one. I use Acrobat for that. Very easy and straightforward. So that is the single page. That went really long because I had to explain everything, but typically I can do these pretty quickly. a couple of few a day if I'm really dragging, and I'm very easily distracted, and I always have the TV on. So your mileage may vary, and your work ethic will definitely vary. But that's this in a nutshell. If you have any questions, or when you get down to your turn of lettering your pages, and you want placement questions or font questions or technique questions, send me an email here. And please do not sign me up for spam messages, mailing lists, and things. My name is Greg Sorkin, and I have been your lettering guru for the day. Go forth and letter. Thank you.